In the early 1950s, while Japan was still rebuilding from the horrors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, movie studio Toho, still bound by very strict media censorship imposed by the Americans about the depiction of war, producer Tomonouki Tanaka went to Indonesia to try and create a Japanese-Indonesian co-production film called In the Shadow of Glory. This movie was supposed to be a first stepping stone into rebuilding relationships between Indonesia and Japan. However, when he landed in the country's capital, anti-Japanese sentiment after the Japanese occupation of the country was so great that his visa was pulled and he was not allowed to enter the country. However, because of this, on the flight back while looking out into the ocean, Tomonouki Tanaka came up with the idea for what would be his magnum opus. Godzilla. The film became a landmark of Japanese cinema, and now over 64 years and 33 movies later, Godzilla is still a worldwide icon. Like James Bond, I can't think of another movie franchise that has adapted with the times as well as Godzilla has. And, well, being my favourite franchise, and the fact that I promised when I hit 10,000 subscribers I would count down every single movie to date, and well, since that's happened, it's time to start this countdown, so come and join me over the coming weeks as I count down every single Godzilla movie, yes, every single one. That is 55 hours worth of film I've got to go over, starting from the lowest of the lows and ending on my personal #1 favourite Godzilla movie. One of the questions I keep being asked most is why do I love Godzilla so much? Well, honestly, it's one of the few film franchises that is for everyone. If you think about it, there is a Godzilla movie for everyone. It goes dark and serious, to goofy and comical, to just balls to the wall insane. You name it, Godzilla has probably done it, from Hollywood action movie to science fiction to weird art house movie. Godzilla has a movie that can fit into anything, and well, 99% of the time they're always entertaining and never boring. From being actual genuine good movies to just flat out insane and just hilarious to watch. Godzilla is for everyone, and that's why I love it so much. So to thank you all for your support, you finally get to know my thoughts on every single Godzilla movie. Now, all those positive things I just said, forget all of them as we start off at the bottom of the list with the worst of the worst. Number 33. Godzilla's Revenge. Oh, okay, let's just get this one over with. Yeah, who didn't see this one coming? It is by far the worst Godzilla movie ever made. It feels more like a bad Gamera movie more than a Godzilla movie. The main character is a nerdy, annoying kid who loves everything about Godzilla. Woo! Breaking new ground there. This movie is just so bad. And making Manila the main focus of the movie, and also making him talk, is basically like turning him into Scrappy-Doo of the Godzilla franchise. We don't want to see Godzilla's crappy little offspring, we want to see the big guy himself. And the 90% of the time we do see Godzilla, it is in stock footage that we have already seen. And yes, there is the theory that this movie is technically non-canon because in this movie universe, Godzilla is a film character and the kid is just a fan of all the films, but it still doesn't excuse how much of a bad movie this is. And also, it's not really much of an excuse for the use of stock footage. Really, if you think about it, yes, you could put a actual explanation towards it, but the real explanation for why there's so much stock footage is because this is a very cheap movie. And you've also got the annoying kid dreaming about the worst Godzilla monster and worst Godzilla villain, Gamera, who came back in the prequel book to Godzilla Planet of the Monsters, where they made him as pathetic as he deserved to be, because this is just a pathetic, weak villain, with one of the most useless powers when you come to think about it. And the fact that if you honestly think about how people complain that Godzilla is basically just guys in rubber suits, This is the most guy in rubber suit looking kaiju that Godzilla has ever had. And then when you come down to it, this isn't even a Godzilla movie, it's the kids dreaming about a Godzilla movie. The final act of the movie focuses on a Home Alone style ending with two robbers. Then Godzilla doesn't appear in the last 20 minutes of this movie. What was his revenge? What was it all about? I know Toho wanted to take Godzilla in a more kid-friendly direction, but they forgot what it was about Godzilla that got him so popular. We wanted to see him as a hero, yes, but we didn't want to see his crappy little kid doing, ooh, you know, stand up to bullies and all that sort of stuff movies. No, we want to see Godzilla fighting giant monsters. And with no annoying kids, because this is also the worst human character in all Godzilla movies, because he is the most annoying little kid ever, and I find myself siding with the bullies on this one and why they bully him, because he is just that annoying. And I'm going to go back to the sheer level of stock footage because it's damn near unacceptable. You know when a TV show has to have a clip show episode? Well, that's this whole movie. Anytime that there's a kaiju on the screen that has been in a past movie, you bet you that's not going to be new footage, that's stock footage. Let's see, you got Son of Godzilla, Destroy All Monsters, King Kong Escapes, Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster. There's damn near every Godzilla movie in this movie. Yeah, this whole movie is, well, basically, if you want to point at a movie and blame it for the downfall of the Showa era, well, blame this movie. It is hands down the worst Godzilla movie ever made. Number 32. Godzilla 1998. Okay, so I know some people like this movie because, you know, they don't look at it as a Godzilla movie, but even when I don't look at it as a Godzilla movie, I still hate this movie because it's just another Roland Emmerich Ain't America Great Jerk-Off movie. It's such an Emmerich movie, it has so many of his tropes. The cast of thousands upon thousands of characters, the stereotyping, the American ass-kissing, the quirky comic relief stereotype, and the forced romance story. I mean, there is just so much wasted opportunity in this movie. And speaking of wasted opportunity, the wasted Siskel and Ebert parody characters, where they just basically, Emmerich just put these two in the movie because Siskel and Ebert didn't like all his other movies. It sort of just comes off as a kind of an insult, and, well, won't you know, Siskel and Ebert hated this movie too. And this was just before Siskel died as well, which just makes it even more insulting when you come to think about it. And if you can actually have these parody characters, why don't you do something with them? If you come to think about it, these two could be completely removed from the movie and nothing would happen. Godzilla doesn't even really interact with them. And even they point out themselves, what if you're gonna put us in the movie for a criticism, you know, have Godzilla step on us, have Godzilla eat us or something. But no, he doesn't do that. They're just there. Completely removing them, well, you can basically completely remove half the characters in this movie and nothing would change. And let's get into Godzilla. Okay, well, Zilla. And while I have said in the past I do like this design, when it's not Godzilla, I can't say it makes this movie much better because, well, it was marketed and sold as a Godzilla movie and they don't get anything right about him. He's not indestructible, he can't even breathe fire, and, you know, he's supposed to fight another kaiju or something like that. Or be, you know, if he's solo, be a symbol for something, or you know, prove how nature can always triumph anything what humanity comes at. Godzilla doesn't really feel like a force of nature in this movie, he just feels like an animal that stumbled into the wrong place. Also, let's get into how Godzilla's babies, well, the baby Godzillas, are basically just complete rip-offs of Jurassic Park and the Velociraptor stuff. There's no other excuse for that because Emmerich clearly wanted to make his Jurassic Park. He didn't want to make a Godzilla movie, he just wanted to make a America Great Jurassic Park movie, and yeah, he just completely missed the point and just wanted to kiss America's ass again. Oh, and yes, the acting is atrocious. Matthew Broderick basically just plays Matthew Broderick, that girl that is, well, this movie killed her career. I can't even remember her name, and it killed her career for a reason because she is horrible in this movie. And for some reason this movie also has half the Simpsons cast in it. And they're the only actors who actually give a good performance in this movie. This movie sucks. Number 31. Godzilla City on the Edge of Battle. Okay, yeah, this is the most recent Godzilla movie at the time of this video, so it's the freshest in my head, and While my position on it might change later, there's no beating around the bush. This movie sucked. I used to say that every Godzilla movie was entertaining, from either being really good or just laughably bad. But until now, I can't say that anymore because this movie is so boring. What a wasted opportunity. I didn't mind Planet of the Monsters because I thought it was some good setup for the next two movies to work on. But when it comes down to it, City on the Edge of Battle is basically the same movie as Planet of Monsters. Think about it, 2/3 of this movie is just setup and the last 10 minutes are Godzilla at the end who just shows up. Also, whose idea was it in the marketing to tease the crap out of it being Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, and then when you come down to the actual movie, not use Mechagodzilla at all? He doesn't even turn on, they basically just use him to make a city. Talk about false advertising. I mean, yeah, it was advertised as Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, and instead it's Godzilla versus a city and some robots that were just slightly upgraded from the first movie. Oh, it's a fresh idea. How about Godzilla fights a city, unlike damn near every Godzilla movie where he trashes a city? So different. The more and more I think about it, the more and more this trilogy just disappoints me so much. And yes, the next movie is going to feature King Ghidorah, but from what they've been doing recently and the teaser image for King Ghidorah, I'm just expecting King Ghidorah to be a Rise of the Silver Surfer Galactus-style fart cloud. The more you read the prequel novel to Planet of the Monsters, the more you realise that would have made a better trilogy than the one we're actually getting. I mean, what is there to say? This anime is so boring. The characters are basically boring cardboard cutouts of every single anime trope character we have ever seen. The emotionless leader who has had a dark past, so that means he can be an absolute emotionless dick to everyone around him. Female who's only there to be the romantic interest of the main lead, even when he's just a complete dick to her. And also the old wise sage man who's there basically to, pass on wisdom to our dick main character. And also the other miscellaneous characters. There is just so much wasted opportunity in this movie, in this franchise, in this trilogy. You have Godzilla and a planet where the kaijus won. That would have been amazing, especially when they've been teasing like all these past monsters were coming back, but no, they didn't come back. They all died in the prequel book, so it's just Godzilla and these just anime slug bat things that... ugh. The one good thing I can say about this movie is that the animation is good. That's it. This was such a great idea wasted, and the fact that this movie completely bombed in the theatres in Japan and critical and fan reception have just been so negative towards it really makes me worry that Toho aren't going to try to make another Godzilla anime when Godzilla is primed for a good anime adaptation, but this might just put them off doing one for a very long time, which they shouldn't, because this is a great idea. Godzilla is perfect to make an anime series out of. Just not this. Not this wasted opportunity. Number 30. Godzilla vs. Hedorah. I just recently reviewed this movie, so if you want a more in-depth look, then go watch it. Okay, so I don't get why this movie shows up on so many best of Godzilla film lists. This movie is just a pretentious environmental film, and it's a case of a director that just went insane doing whatever the hell he liked, and he wanted to film stuff that he thought, oh, that would look super cool on film, and not thinking about if it actually made any sense in the context of the movie. I know a lot of film students will tell me that it's amazing and I don't get the symbolism of this movie and all these shots mean something in the grand scheme of things, but that's the thing, this is a Godzilla movie. There's only one thing Godzilla should symbolise, and that's what the first movie did perfectly. And when you come to think about it, using a metaphor for the horrors of the atomic bomb and now changing it to be a grand defender of the environment doesn't make any real sense. Now, I know a lot of Godzilla movies before this have, not been a symbol of nuclear destruction and all that sort of stuff, but they weren't using Godzilla as Captain Planet. But also in the just filmmaking itself, there's a lot of this movie where nothing happens. There's just overly long scenes of characters just standing around, or Godzilla and Hedorah just standing around looking at each other or looking at a thing, not doing anything. It just doesn't make any sense with how boring and then just weird this movie gets. It goes from 0 to 100 very quickly and then back to 0 again. This movie is also tonally just insane with really dark and disturbing imagery, especially for a quote-unquote kids movie, and then goes to hippie 70s cheese fest. This movie can't stick to a tone, it's just all over the place from start to finish. And then we got the annoying tropes that quite a lot of Godzilla movies of this era had. For example, the annoying kid that loves Godzilla. Yes, straight from Gamera. He's an annoying kid that loves Godzilla, and he's not as annoying as some Gamera kids, and he kind of just has no part in the third act of this movie. He just stands around watching. But really, he's not as annoying as some of the human grown-up characters are in this movie. The scientist and his wife are fine, they're just bland characters, but the two hippie characters are so annoying because they're just annoying hippie characters. It's just hard to put a finger on just why they're so annoying, but they are, because that's all they do all the time. Is they're very irresponsible, their actions are very stupid, and they're always jovial and just think everything's gonna go swimming for them. And let's not forget that this movie has the most ridiculous thing ever put to film, with Godzilla flying. There's a reason this scene became so infamous. It's just insane, and out of nowhere too. Godzilla just decides he can do this now. And also it has the worst soundtrack in Godzilla history. It is just a collection of instruments being played at once. Godzilla's theme sounds like something you'd hear on Looney Tunes, and it also has a James Bond title song. I don't get it, it's all over the place. The only real positive thing I can say is that Hedorah itself, when they were being horrifying with it, generally was scary. Its design was scary, and it did scare me as a kid. But the rest of the movie is just completely insane. It's a failed art house movie that makes no sense, and it's just pretentious, really. Number 29. Ebirah, Horror of the Deep. What happens when you take a King Kong script and just cross out King Kong and replace it with Godzilla? You get Ebirah, Horror of the Deep. One of the most bog standard Godzilla movies out there. Unlike the later Showa era Godzilla movies that got ridiculous, this movie is still in the try to make it serious era, so there's not much really goofy stuff that happens. Hell, Godzilla doesn't even wake up till an hour into the movie, and Mothra is asleep until the last 10 minutes. As for Ebirah, well, it's a King Kong villain that's put up against Godzilla, so it really stands no chance. Ebirah gets its ass kicked in the two fights it's in. It is basically just a giant crab, or shrimp, or some kind of lobster crab shrimp hybrid thing. It has no special powers, it is just a lobster, which also somehow seems to have the James Bond theme. Okay, fine. And as for the human villains, well, the Red Bamboo, well, try to set up as the recurring big bads of future Godzilla movies, but they only make one appearance and never come back again. And they are basically a terrorist group, so of course when Godzilla shows up, they're vastly outmatched. And while the movie starts them off being an imposing threat, by the end of the movie they're just laughable in just how kind of bad and pathetic they are. I especially love how in all the scenes that the military soldiers are in, they just start firing randomly, and in some of the shots it clearly looks like they fired into the backs of their own men. They do come off as idiots sometimes, considering how they have set up this grand military base, which apparently they've been there for years, but have never heard or even found Godzilla sleeping away in the mountain. And also, if you think about it, their grand plan for getting people to work for them, getting their slaves, is to attack an island with a goddess protecting it. Yeah, she's asleep at the time, but think about it, when she wakes up, she's going to be pretty pissed. So these guys were doomed from the start, if you think about it. As for the other main characters, well, this movie has a problem where it has far too many main characters. We start off the movie with 4, and by the end we have about 8. So none of them really get much development apart from maybe Dio and the crime guy. They're the only ones who really kind of have some kind of character development and arc, and the rest, well, at some point actually I kind of get some of them confused. There's so many of them that this movie doesn't really know what to do with a lot of them, so they separate a few of them and then they just sort of disappear from the movie and don't really show up until the end. Apart from the rest of the movie, there's not really much to say, it's just not that interesting. It does get good when Godzilla wakes up, but that's like in the last half hour, and they do cram in a lot in the last half hour, but you have to slog through an hour of just not a lot happening, and scenes that, when you think about it, just lead nowhere and end with nothing happening. I mean, it is the first Godzilla movie to have Godzilla not attack a huge big city. It's basically Godzilla on an island, but it kind of struggles because when Godzilla shows up, he doesn't have that much to destroy. It's just a very small base, and that's it. There's not really that much in this movie, it's just a bog standard, a bit boring Godzilla movie. That's about it. It doesn't really do anything. And that's because it wasn't supposed to be a Godzilla movie to begin with. Number 28. Godzilla Raids again. It's amazing how quickly a film series can lose its original meaning from the first movie, but Godzilla Raids again does it very, very quickly. You could sue for whiplash with how much of a rush this movie is, and it really does come off that way. The Godzilla suit is probably one of the worst Godzilla's ever had, and the plot is just, it's a Godzilla shows up with another monster. How are the humans going to deal with it? That's the movie. There is not a lot, there really isn't much at all. It's also a very short movie, and that just really tells with how much of a rushed time it has. And while this movie is important because it becomes the template for every Godzilla vs movie, this is the first one and it has a lot of issues because of it. Mostly due to the fact of how rushed it was. It has a paper-thin script with very bland and undeveloped characters, and the returning cast is really underused. There is also so much filler in this movie. Anguirus being the first Godzilla movie that Godzilla fights is dealt with halfway through the movie, and then the movie just struggles with what to do with for the rest of it. And the final plan to get rid of Godzilla at the end goes on for way too long. This movie is so full of issues. The characters have the complexity of boiled rice and are just as interesting, but there are parts I like Anguirus being my favourite kaiju, so that's a plus. And this being the first Godzilla fight, while it's not one of the best, I do like it because this is one of the few Godzilla fights where the monsters actually act like animals in how they fight. With a lot of the fight, the monsters just being scratching, biting and tackling into each other, and also a lot of moments of them just stopping and sizing each other up. With how ridiculous some of the Godzilla fights get later on, it's nice that the first has a bit of realism to it. But apart from that, there's not much in this movie either. It is basically a rushed Godzilla movie, made less than a year after the first one, and it really, really shows. A lot of this movie's problems have to do with how quickly it was made, less than a year after the first one, and it really shows with just how rushed it is. When Godzilla and Anguirus aren't on screen, you can basically just skip the rest of this movie. There's not much that happens. Just have the two monsters fight each other and then skip to the end. You can be done with this movie in less than half an hour. It's one of the most skippable Godzilla movies. Number 27. Godzilla vs. Gigan. Yep, I put this movie above Raids Again and Hedorah. Yep, do you want to know why I put this movie higher than a lot of people would? Because this was the first Godzilla movie I ever watched. And well, yeah, a little biased towards that, and well, I do like the last third of this movie despite all the stock footage, but I didn't know that when I was a kid, so this movie was awesome. You got a good half hour of four kaijus just beating the crap out of each other. All the kaiju stuff is pretty good. Gigan, the new kaiju, which is one of the most interesting and most unique kaijus there's ever been, and is one of my all-time favourite, and you've got King Ghidorah coming back. The King Ghidorah suit has seen better days. It's definitely great to see King Ghidorah back and absolutely kicking ass. And also it has Anguirus in it, and he's my babe. All the fights are really good, and every monster gets a moment to shine. This is also the first Godzilla movie to have Godzilla draw blood. It really does feel like an absolute beatdown of each other monster. It's an absolute slogfest. It feels like these are four kaijus just going at each other until only two are left. It is one of my favourite fights, despite all the stock footage. However, the rest of the movie is annoying. The characters especially. The main lead is a man-child who acts goofy in serious situations, and we're supposed to find it funny and endearing, but you just want the bad guys to shoot him. His girlfriend really should have been the main hero of this, but no, she's just relegated to woman character. Even though she's an absolute ass kicker during this movie, during the end of the movie she is basically just relegated to screaming woman. And the other characters are, well, a lot of them don't really do anything, they're just there. But I really also do like the villains. Despite how complicated and ridiculous their plan is, I generally like them. They have a good motivation, they have a good origin, and while their plan, while ridiculous, while they think they can take over the world with two kaiju, when there's a planet full of them, is a bit ridiculous, but you know, it's funny, especially with how deadpan and serious they're taking this, and how their grand plan basically got destroyed by a comic book artist. That's just hilarious. But really, apart from the main villains, everything else in this movie is kind of bog standard Godzilla stuff. Aliens show up, they want to take over the world and destroy it, they have two kaiju, Godzilla and his partner fight them. Apart from the last fight in the movie, 2/3 of this movie can be completely skipped. And, well, yeah, it is my first Godzilla movie, so it'll always hold a place in my heart, but yeah, looking back at it now, it wasn't that great. Number 26. Godzilla vs. Megaguirus. The weakest movie in the Millennium series, this is just a bog standard Godzilla movie. It doesn't add anything, it doesn't do much that's new to the series, it is basically just another Godzilla fights another monster and the military try to kill Godzilla movie. It is as simple as it comes, and I didn't even know it was supposed to be a reboot, not taking place after Godzilla 2000, when pretty much the Godzilla suits are pretty much identical to each other. It's very confusing if you didn't know that. There is plenty of Godzilla action in this movie, which is always a plus, but Megaguirus doesn't really show up until the very end of the movie and just has a fight with Godzilla. Has no real development, it's just, here's Megaguirus, it fights Godzilla, and it's dead. But to be fair, this is one of my favourite fights in all of the Godzilla series. It is just a great fun fight, and it's something only the Japanese could do. I really do enjoy this fight, it's just such fun. It has hilarious moments, it has genuine moments where Godzilla looks like he might lose. Megaguirus does at times pose a threat, but also Godzilla holds his own against this bug thing. But apart from that, this movie doesn't really have anything but cliched characters. You have the hard-ass dark character who has a past with Godzilla and wants to destroy Godzilla because Godzilla did something to them in their past. Something that, well, quite a few Godzilla movies seem to really like doing. And this one's one of the most blandest. Her character will be done much better 2 movies later. And we also have the nerdy, annoying tech guy. This movie also looks like it's going to have an annoying kid character, but he just disappears halfway through the movie. But he's very integral to the plot because he basically gets Megaguirus going. He can't be removed from the movie because he's needed, but once he's done with, he just disappears from the movie. I mean, the only real thing that this movie does, which is just downright ridiculous, is the plan to deal with Godzilla. Not only with how insane the idea is, but with also how quickly they managed to pull off basically a singularity gun, which they basically call a black hole gun, which they don't see any downside to, despite the fact that this thing is basically a black hole gun. But they wrote themselves into a corner because if it was a black hole gun, they could just fire it whenever they want and kill Godzilla, but apparently the black hole gun doesn't work in water, so they have to get Godzilla on land to kill him. But what if they target Godzilla and it becomes a rainy day? Does that mean it's not going to work then? It doesn't make much sense when you think about it. Also not considering the fact that, well, if this gun worked at full power, it could basically destroy the whole planet. It's just ridiculous. But yeah, apart from that, this is just another Godzilla movie where Godzilla fights another kaiju that's related somehow to Godzilla. And the military have a latest idea to kill Godzilla that, of course, they guarantee will kill Godzilla once and for all, but of course it backfires and breaks and doesn't work, and well, Godzilla just survives it because he always survives it. Their black hole gun breaks all laws of physics. It's the single most ridiculous weapon in a Godzilla movie, but apart from that, it is just a bog standard Godzilla flick. 25. Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla. My favourite era of Godzilla really does have a bland penultimate film. This movie definitely has the feeling of running out of ideas. Like, hey, what if Godzilla fought another Godzilla, but from space? Woo! Also, we have Little Godzilla that looks a lot like a chibi Godzilla. Well, he's not worse than Manila, at least. And I really think Space Godzilla's design just comes off as lazy, considering that they basically just retooled the Super Godzilla design. Considering with all the other designs they could have gone with, yeah, it just does kind of come off as lazy. And well, I really do like Megaguirus. I really do love the design of Megaguirus in this movie. He basically spends the entire movie getting his ass kicked, and that's his point. The final battle also really does have a lot of filler, with honestly not a lot happening because it's mostly just the monsters firing their beams at each other. This was always my problem with some of the Heisei era Godzilla movie battles, where it basically just felt like that it was just Godzilla firing his atomic breath for the whole fight. And this movie really does feel like it, because Space Godzilla's design meant he was so hard to move around in, is that they couldn't really do much hand-to-hand combat, so it had to resort to basically just energy weapons and Godzilla just firing his beam all the time. There isn't really that much to this fight, it's just basically that. They also bring up in this movie that Godzilla has a bit of intelligence to him, yet he keeps on firing his beam at Space Godzilla, which Space Godzilla can create a shield to reflect, so it just sort of feels like they had to do what they could with what they can, and it just sort of leads to an uninteresting fight. There's also other moments of this movie that just sort of had that feeling of an whatever, fuck it, movie sort of to it. Because, I mean, there's a scene of the movie where Godzilla's tail tip falls off, and they might have reshot that scene, but, you know, it just sort of feels like they went, screw it, let's just leave it in, no one will notice, apart from everyone notices it. It's also the same with the characters. Apart from the returning cast, most of them don't really have any standout moments. Apart from the commander who wants to kill Godzilla because Godzilla killed someone in his past. And he is interesting in that sort of tired war veteran sort of character, who's just sort of done with life and just wants to get revenge, no matter what the cost. But apart from that, all the other characters are bland. Honestly, I do feel like you could completely skip this movie, go from Godzilla vs Mechagodzilla to Godzilla vs Destroyer, completely skip this movie and you wouldn't really miss anything. But apart from that, there are some good things in this movie. It's nice that this is the first Heisei era Godzilla movie where Godzilla is the outright hero from beginning to end. Also, little Godzilla is really cute, I'm not going to deny it. And some of the things that Space Godzilla does are really cool, but it's not really enough to really save this movie. The feeling I get from this movie when watching it is mostly tired. This is a tired franchise, and you know, it sort of felt like it was a tired Godzilla movie. They were just out of ideas. It completely makes sense that they decided to end it at the next movie. So yeah, it's just a meh Godzilla movie. Oh, and why were the two guys on the island watching the commander guys shower? Seriously, what was the point of that? Number 24. Son of Godzilla. Oh man, this movie. This is where the Showa era really takes a drastic change. This is where it really takes a left turn into becoming a very kid-friendly movie. And it's not as bad as some of the other movies get, but you can tell Son of Godzilla is the start of Godzilla's turn into kid-friendly hero. However, it isn't a bad movie. It has a fun plot, an interesting setting, despite the last Godzilla movie being Godzilla on an island, and the next movie is Godzilla on an island. And yes, Godzilla does look like the Cookie Monster, and Manila, well, do I really need to say anything that hasn't already been said? The main problem I really have with this movie is that there are too many main characters. There are so many characters in this movie, which should have been like an isolated bottle episode of a movie where it was, you know, Godzilla on an island with just a handful of people, and this one there is just so many people in this movie. So none of them really get any kind of development or growth, they're just there to react and be scientists. But this movie does have plenty of Godzilla action. Well, it has Godzilla sleeping a lot, but then Manila is running around getting into trouble, which, you know, can be cute at times, but then you realise what Manila looks like. But it's all in good fun, and we do really get some good Godzilla being a dad moments. He's a better dad than most humans, honestly. As for Kumonga and Megaguirus, well, they're basically just giant insect kaiju. There's nothing really special about them. I mean, Megaguirus is just there to get his ass kicked. That's the only point of him being in this movie. And it's a really fun first fight, don't get me wrong. Godzilla just beating up some puppets is always fun. But the final fight with Kumonga isn't really that good because, well, it is Godzilla fighting a giant puppet, and there's not really much they can do because if Godzilla does some of the stuff that he does in the later movies, there's very much a chance that he'll break a lot of the puppet strings and stuff like that, and, well, we could see a puppeteer falling off the rafters. There's not much really to say about the final fight, it's just not that memorable. But really, it's a movie where you can see Godzilla start to becoming really silly. And I can't deny, the ending is really, really heartwarming. I mean, when I was a kid, this ending actually got me teary-eyed. The two monsters hugging each other as they freeze, Godzilla being a dad reassuring his son that everything's going to be okay, despite what's going on, it really does leave a lump in your throat. It's a very good ending. It's just a shame the rest of the movie isn't that much, really. When it gets silly, it gets really silly, but when it's to the human stuff, it's just, well, boring Godzilla human stuff. So yeah, this movie can be really fun, but it also can be quite boring at times. Number 23. Godzilla Planet of Monsters. Okay, while I originally said that this movie was alright, rewatching it I realised just how much filler there was. This movie already takes a good half hours before the characters even get to Earth. And well, let's be honest, that first half hour has very little to do with the rest of the story. They really should have just started the movie at the humans landing on Earth. Also rewatching it, I just realised how unlikable the main hero is. He is just a cardboard cutout, edgy dick, who is just an absolute asshole to everyone. He has very little development and very little personality, and this movie is supposed to make us, you know, side with him, make us think that, yeah, this is a personal, deep, like, Moby Dick story that he's going through, but, you know, he's just an absolute asshole. Why everyone likes him is just beyond me. And this movie was also supposed to be set up for the other two movies. I can understand that. But as we've seen from the sequel, all that setup basically led to nothing, because the second movie was all set up as well. It has the same problem as the Matrix sequels, where it likes to tell you how everything's important and what this is and what that is and how it all makes sense and everything, but it doesn't think to actually do anything with it. It tells you how important and how amazing all this stuff is, it doesn't do anything with it. It's like, oh yes, it's going to be really interesting later on, but you know, as a movie standalone by itself, it's not that interesting. We don't want to be told how amazing it is, we want to see it. This movie doesn't have a lot, it's mostly just people talking. Just very uninteresting cardboard cutout stereotype anime characters just talking. It's not interesting. And I still just can't get over how uninteresting the main character is. He's the character that's in quite a few Godzilla movies. You know, the character who wants to get revenge on Godzilla because Godzilla did something to his past, but he's just such an emotionless dickhead. You know, he's like, oh, Godzilla killed people I love, that means I hate him and I'm emotionless, I'm a dick to everyone, apart from, you know, everyone else is in the same situation as him because Godzilla and all the other kaijus killed a lot of people. That's if you read the prequel novels. So, you know, just him singling himself out as like, this is my personal battle, but, you know, everyone else can completely make this a personal battle because, you know, Godzilla killed a shit ton of people in the prequel novels. So everyone would want to get Godzilla, but no, it's all him, it's all about him, and he's just not interesting. He's such an anime trope character. And when you get to Earth, you realise what a terrible leader he is, and they are in way over their heads. They can barely beat the not Godzilla, and then when the real Godzilla shows up, he just obliterates them easily. And if you think about it, what is there in this movie that puts it above any other Godzilla movie? Apart from how big Godzilla is, there isn't really that much in this movie. It's all stuff we've seen before. This was such a wasted opportunity. This setting is such a great idea, and they fucked it up. I can only dread how they'll fuck up the big grand finale. But why is it above so many other movies in this list? Well, I'm not gonna deny, it's a very well made anime. There's a really good animation in it, and it's very well acted. The story isn't ridiculous, but it's not interesting in any way. It's kind of boring, but still, it's a decent, simple movie premise. There's some definite effort and care and love that went into this movie. Apart from the story and the script, really, it's just so carbon, boring and interesting. And it's a shame because there is so much talent in this. Such a wasted opportunity. Number 22. Godzilla vs. Megalon. Amazing how ridiculous this movie can get. For a film that was shot in less than a month, they sure do a lot with hardly anything. This was originally not going to be a Godzilla movie, it was going to be a Jet Jaguar movie. Because Jet Jaguar was designed by a kid, and they won a competition, Toho were going to make it its own movie with, you know, Jet Jaguar versus Megalon and Gigan. It was going to be amazing, but then to make more money, they basically shoved Godzilla in. And Godzilla really does feel shoved in, because he basically is only at the start and at the very end of the movie. And this is also the most humanized Godzilla has ever gotten. This is the first time we ever see him use tools, and he also shakes Jet Jaguar's hand. It's ridiculous. I love it. And also, this is in the era of Toho movies that were just chock full of stock footage. Even using stock footage from the last movie. Especially when day and night just switched drastically, so you would think that this fight goes on for a few days. But no, actually it's basically just seen as a few hours, which doesn't make much sense. But it is just ridiculous. You got these two human characters who are just idiots, even though one's a scientist and one's a famous race car driver. You've got an annoying kid who, well, he spends most of the movie getting his ass kicked by the bad guys. And oh, the bad guys. They're just the best characters in this movie because of how stupid and ridiculous they are. Seatopia, what an amazing idea for a Godzilla movie. An underground city that's pissed off with humanity blowing up atomic bombs, so they're just like, let's release our monster. And oh yes, Megalon. He's one of my favourite kaijus because he starts this movie as being introduced as like this god creature that can destroy the whole world. And then halfway through the movie, he's jumping around and skipping like a child. It's just ridiculous and I love it. And him and Gigan seem to be genuine friends. Like Godzilla and Anguirus level of friends. It's just full of great moments. It feels like a WWE match at the end, but it really does feel like you could put WWE commentary over this final fight. It's pretty amazing, and also Godzilla's greatest ever attack, the sliding tail kick, which, you know, doesn't make any sense at all, what's the physics on that, but still, it's just amazing. But I'm not going to say this is a good movie. It's not a good movie. It's not a good movie in any way. It's an amazingly riffable movie. You can take the piss out of this movie for the whole time it's on. It's a great time watch, but it's not a good movie, and I'm not going to defend it as a good movie in any way. It's a piece of crap. It's a cheap, quickly made piece of crap, but it's an amazingly funny piece of crap. Number 21. Godzilla Tokyo SOS. Okay, I feel like this may be one of my most controversial picks, because I've seen this movie appear on a lot of top 10s, and well, I'm sorry, I just don't get it. I just don't get anything from this movie. I'm not going to say it's not good, but as for a Godzilla movie, it doesn't really break any molds. It's just another Godzilla movie in my opinion. It also feels like everything about this movie was a bit of a downgrade from the preceding movies. The characters aren't as good, the fights aren't as good, the plot isn't as good. It's just not as good. And Godzilla himself isn't that good. I'm not a fan of Godzilla movies where Godzilla spends the whole movie getting his ass kicked. Now I know a lot of Godzilla movies have that, but usually during the end of the fight Godzilla gets a resurgence and comes back and wins the fight. But no, in this movie he basically just spends the entire time getting his ass kicked. He's supposed to be the villain of the movie, but he never really felt that much of a threat all throughout the whole movie. Which is something Godzilla should never be. He should never look weak. He should be the, the god of destruction. The alpha predator of the entire planet, the top of the food chain. He is Godzilla, the king of the monsters. But he doesn't really feel like a king in this. Yeah, he gets a few moments, but they never last long. He basically just spends the whole movie getting his ass kicked by Mothra and Mechagodzilla. It's just very disappointing. As for everything else, well, this does have my favourite Mothra design. It has a good balance between beauty and actually looking like a kaiju. And as I'll say later, this Mechagodzilla is my favourite Mechagodzilla design, although why they keep calling it Mecha G in this movie makes no sense. But they also just repeat the same plot from the last movie, of where Mechagodzilla gets damaged so the pilot has to go inside Mechagodzilla and control it from there. It is pretty much note for note exactly the same as Godzilla against Mechagodzilla. And as for characters, well, we had one of the best female characters in all of the Godzilla franchise in the last movie, and for some reason they just boot her off to another country, and we just get this nerdy annoying douche character in the replacement who is not as good as her in any way, shape or form. He just isn't that likeable in any way. This movie also has a bit of a wasted opportunity in that the Mothra Shinobis come to humanity to say return Mechagodzilla to the sea because because Mothra's angry that Mechagodzilla has Godzilla's bones in them, and that's why Godzilla's attacking humans because they've disgraced the bones and stuff like that. That could have led to something quite interesting where it would have been Mothra as an anti-hero, sort of like she's not on the human side but she also wants to stop Godzilla. That could have been interesting. It could have been a three-way fight, but no, Mothra kind of gets sidelined for when Mechagodzilla shows up and she dies as usual. But I will say this movie does have one of the best kid characters in a Godzilla movie. He's not annoying and he's quite smart and has a nice character, and he's not overly thrust into the movie where he shows up in every scene. Like he shows up in military facilities telling them not to destroy Godzilla because Godzilla's the friend of humanity or stuff like that. They don't do that with him. He's actually a pretty good character. But yeah, this isn't a bad movie, it just feels like a bit of a downgrade from the last movie. It's just a bog standard Godzilla movie to me. I don't see the fuss about it. It's alright, and that's about it really. Number 20. Destroy All Monsters. This is a movie that has slipped down a lot in my opinion upon recent viewing. Yes, this movie has a ton of kaiju in it, but when you think about it, hardly any of them get any screen time at all. Some of them due to not having the suits ready in time, but also because this movie just seems to have an absolute love affair with the one prop that is actually kind of good. This rocket prop that they show throughout the movie. I think it has more screen time than Godzilla. Also focusing way too much on a group of humans as well. And for what was supposed to be the big grand finale of the Godzilla franchise, it really does feel like a missed opportunity. You have all these kaijus you can play with and hardly any of them get any screen time. It really does feel like this rocket prop that they made, the producers were so proud of it, they wanted to put it in as many scenes as possible. So even the grand final battle between all the monsters in Ghidorah is kind of ruined because then something else shows up, so the big actual final battle is between the rocket and a spaceship. Doing some adding up, Godzilla actually has less screen time in this than 2014 Godzilla. Yet this one is loved so much for this big monster brawl, but honestly when the monsters aren't on screen, this movie isn't that interesting at all. The characters are so bland and just so cardboard cutout, there's nothing really to talk about them. And yes, we have the Kilaaks, the aliens, they're actually, fairly interesting, and they do have this sort of menace towards them, how they're always calm and smiling and just all relaxed while they plot to basically destroy humanity. That's kind of good, and when the kaijus are on screen, like the city destruction scenes and the grand finale, it is very good, but there isn't enough of it really. There are some good set pieces, and this movie does have a lot in it for such a short space of time. I just wish there was more kaiju action and less human stuff. But with all my complaining, I can't deny that the final battle in this movie, with all the monsters versus King Ghidorah, is one of the best fights in all of the Godzilla franchise. In my opinion, honestly, just fast forward to the final battle of the movie, or have some of the city destruction scenes in there as well. But the final battle of this movie is so good. Despite King Ghidorah being vastly outnumbered, he actually comes off quite well. He doesn't get completely destroyed straight away. He definitely gives a lot of monsters a good run for their money. And also all the other monsters, the ones that they actually had the suits that they could use for, all get a moment to shine. They all get their one attack and one scene. It really is just a great slugfest of monsters just destroying each other basically. And that final beatdown that Ghidorah does get is kind of brutal. You almost feel sorry for him after you consider all the horrible shit he's done. It is definitely the highlight of the movie. This movie is only really good when the monsters are on screen, but this movie is not a good final movie for the whole series, and well, thank Godzilla it wasn't. Number 19. Godzilla 2000. I think I'm going to get in trouble with this placement with some people, with it being considerably low on the list, but I'm sorry, this movie doesn't really do anything for me. I know this was a lot of people's first Godzilla movie that they saw in theatres. Well, in America anyway. In the UK we didn't get anything. But I'm sorry, this is just another Godzilla movie, to me. It doesn't really have anything that stands out. The story isn't that special, the characters aren't that special. Yes, we have Godzilla vs. the military stuff, which is pretty good and some of the best in the franchise. And it's funny how the military always keep coming up with these grand plans that they guarantee will kill Godzilla, and they fail all the time. This movie does have plenty of good Godzilla action stuff in it, which is always a plus, and Godzilla gets plenty of screen time. But apart from that, there's really not that much to get me going, I get the feeling that this movie was made in a hurry because, well, of what America was currently doing with Godzilla. So, it does feel a bit like a rush job in places, especially when it comes to green screen and CGI effects. You could really tell, they could have done better with this. But as for the other things, well, Orga as a monster and the whole alien thing has been done many times in the Godzilla film. I do like Orga as a concept, I just feel like he's really underused in this movie. I just feel like he's really underutilized in this movie. Godzilla spends more time fighting the UFO than he does actually fighting Orga. The monster design is good, whereas a little bit bland, but it is definitely a good kaiju design, and the suit is really good. It's just a shame that the suit is so big that, again, the suit actor had trouble fighting in it, so there's not a lot really Orga does. Yeah, he kind of gets his ass kicked, honestly. You can definitely tell that it was a problem with the suit, because sometimes it seems like the suit actor is having difficulty even raising his own arms at some points. There's not really much I can say about this movie. This is kind of the hard part, the midpoint of this list, because a lot of these movies don't really stand out to me, but I wouldn't say they're bad. They're just a bit samey. So I'm struggling, to not repeat myself. Most of the stuff in this movie is just okay. The characters, the plot, the pacing, the special effects, they're just okay. Apart from the ending, I really do like the ending, how they say Godzilla saved the entire city and then cut to him completely engulfing it in fire. But yeah, it's just a decent meh movie to me. Number 18. Invasion of the Astro Monster. The second movie to feature King Ghidorah and a direct sequel to the first one, and well, I just feel like it's a bit of a downgrade. This movie takes so long to get going, and then everything else happens in this movie in a very short space of time. This is the first Godzilla movie to have aliens in them, and it has the infamous moment in the series of Godzilla doing his little dance, having his happy moment, and the Exilians become the first and really only recurring main bad guys in the Godzilla series, well, for their 2 appearances. But I will say there are some good stuff in this. There is some actual good human stuff in this one. It has a really heartbreaking human storyline involving one of the human characters falling in love with one of the aliens, and then she just gets killed by the bad guys. It's kind of heartbreaking in a way. You do want these two characters to be happy, but no, the movie doesn't want that. She just dies. She doesn't even get that much of a ceremonial death. She's basically shot and disintegrated. It's kind of tragic in a way. But that's where the problem is. This movie has far too much human stuff. And the main reason why is because, doing research on this movie, because the budget just went insane. So a lot of the kaiju stuff had to be cut down dramatically. Even Mothra, who was supposed to be in this movie, was completely cut. Godzilla and Rodan don't appear until about 40 minutes into the movie. It takes so long to get to the point where the kaijus actually show up. And then after the battle with King Ghidorah in space, we go back to Earth and it's just more human stuff. And it feels like the whole final third act of this movie is done in 10 minutes. Very rushed. The whole unleashing the monsters, them destroying the city, finding a way to get control of the monsters back, defeating the aliens, and the final fight between Rodan, Godzilla and King Ghidorah is done in the space of 10 minutes. And the fact that this movie went way over budget kind of explains it. But apart from that, I really do like Nick Adams in this movie. He is taking it seriously considering everything else that's going on around him. I mean, look at the Exilian's outfits. It's a testament to his acting that he didn't die laughing in every shot. And like I said, the Exilian female romance with Nick Adams feels genuine, and it's really heartbreaking how it ends. Having good human characters in these movies makes the long human moments more tolerable, but I have the problem that there is just far too much of it in this movie. But it is at least entertaining for the most part. While it can get boring in a lot of other scenes, there isn't enough monster action stuff, and yeah, that's basically all my biggest problem with it, is that there is just too much human stuff, so really it's just another Godzilla movie. Number 17. Godzilla vs. Mothra, Battle of the Earth. You know, rewatching this movie, I realised something. This doesn't need to be a Godzilla movie, because thinking about it, you could take Godzilla completely out of this movie, change a few things, and it could just be a Mothra vs. Batra movie. Godzilla does really feel like a third wheel in this movie. And from reading behind the scenes stuff, originally it wasn't even supposed to be a Godzilla movie, it was supposed to be a Mothra movie. And it really does tell like they just switched out the monster that Mothra was supposed to fight name with Godzilla. Because yeah, he just shows up in this movie. He doesn't really have that much to do with the overall plot, he's just sort of there. But let's get into the positives. The special effects are really good for the Heisei era. This is some of the best in the series. And it makes sense that this movie has a big spiritual feeling towards it with the whole yin-yang dynamic of Mothra and Batra. The fights themselves aren't great because again it's Godzilla fighting puppets. But when it's Mothra versus Batra, it's actually a pretty good fight, a good aerial combat, which we don't get much of in the Godzilla series. But really, there are other Heisei movies that do these fights better. The Rebirth of Mothra movies absolutely nail the aerial combat fights. And this movie does give the Mothra twins a nice update, as well as making Mothra basically Earth's goddess, the protector of all life, being the ultimate form of good, Batra being the ultimate form of evil. These two are needed to balance everything out, and as for Godzilla, well, yeah, like I've said, he just does feel like he doesn't need to be there. He's only there to get more money from the box office, basically, so they can label it as a Godzilla movie. But I will admit it has one of the most badass Godzilla moments in the whole franchise, with Godzilla himself swimming through the Earth's crust and coming out a volcano, just because he can do that. But as for everything else, like I've said before, this movie doesn't really have that much good going for it when it comes to the human stuff, apart from the returning cast, but they get hardly any screen time in this movie. New human characters are just, well, they're just there for the Mothra twins to explain stuff to them. They don't really do that much and don't really have that much of a character. There is plenty of good kaiju action in this movie, but yeah, again, to me, it's just another bog standard Godzilla movie. But this movie doesn't really need to have Godzilla in it. It is the most average Godzilla movie in the whole franchise, and that's why it's halfway in this list. When I was making this list, when I put all the movies together, from worst to best, this movie basically just slot right in the middle. It is just the average of the series. Number 16. Terror of Mechagodzilla. The last movie of the Showa era, It really goes out with a bang. I mean, literally, this movie has so much explosions in it. This must be Michael Bay's favourite of the series. However, we really do have to go through a lot of filler before stuff starts happening. However, most of the stuff is actually good. While Godzilla and Mechagodzilla don't really do anything till about an hour into the movie, we do get plenty of Titanosaurus action, and as the new kaiju, he's definitely one of the most tragic kaijus. He doesn't want to be evil, he's just sort of forced to be evil by an evil mad scientist. It's not his fault, he's supposed to be a peaceful, friendly kaiju. You know, it's a good kaiju that's turned evil by an evil mad scientist and evil aliens, you know, that classic tale. And also the human-android story is quite tragic as well. There's a lot in this movie that's actually quite tragic, and none of it really involves Godzilla, because when Godzilla's on screen it's absolutely epic. But it's weird how this movie doesn't really end on a happy ending, it just sort of has this like real somber ending to it with Godzilla returning to the sea. Which, being the end of the Showa era, kind of really makes sense in context. But yeah, this is a movie where you just feel sad and sorry for most of the characters. Titanosaurus, the mad scientist, while he is evil, you kind of feel sorry for him with how he was right and he was basically just drove to this madness by his peers not believing him. But then when you get to the kaiju stuff, it's absolutely bloody epic. This has one of the best city destruction scenes in the whole franchise, with Titanosaurus and Mechagodzilla just blowing shit up. Like, my god, look at all these explosions. It's amazing. And the final battle with Godzilla fighting two monsters on his own is also one of the best in the franchise. After 3 straight movies of Godzilla teaming up with another kaiju, it's nice to see Godzilla outnumbered, and at times you could clearly tell he was outgunned, and you definitely felt like Godzilla could lose this one. But I do feel like this movie could have been better if Toho gave it a bigger budget, but as we know from Toho during this time, they had basically no money at all and nearly fell into bankruptcy. But yeah, this is just such a great, final battle. It's just an absolute slugfest and I love it. It's kind of the tale of two different movies. On one hand you have the tragic, sad human story, and on the other side you have the awesome Godzilla fighting kaiju stuff. So as the last hurrah for the Showa era, it's not great, but it's definitely good. It's a nice little ending. It's a nice ending, and you know, I kind of do think it's a good thing that Toho stopped making Godzilla movies for 10 years after this one, because, you know, Godzilla was just tired and needed a rest. And this was a good send-off, so yeah, it's a decent movie. 15. King Kong vs. Godzilla. Now we're getting into the good stuff. Oh yeah, I put this movie in the top half, and it's amazing. This is just the 3rd Godzilla movie ever made, and it's completely off the rails and insane, and it's amazing, and I love it. It doesn't take very long to get going, and when it does, it rarely loses momentum. It is also a great riffing movie. It is so cheesy and so just fun. It's great to laugh with and laugh at and just make jokes at while watching it. There are so many great moments in this movie. Yeah, the human characters aren't that interesting, but who cares when we have King Kong being transported to Mount Fuji via weather balloon? This movie I think also establishes Godzilla's indestructibility, because the military tried pretty much everything to try and stop him, and nothing works. The only thing that sort of works is electricity, and yes, this is the movie that introduces vulnerability to electricity. I know some of you are saying, well, wait, in the first movie, Godzilla actually had no trouble going through electrical barriers. Well, yes, but that was a completely different Godzilla that, you know, died. This is a completely new Godzilla, so maybe it's just genetically different, I don't know. But yeah, this movie is just so full of just great moments, little moments and big ones, and the final fight is one of the best in the whole series. The two really slug out each other and they're just beating each other up. And yes, when King Kong gets his power up with electricity, you might think that means that Godzilla is just going to get beat down for the rest of the movie. But no, actually, it's a very even fight throughout. It's a great fight from start to finish. The two really go at each other. But there's also this little great moments of clear cheese and just where the budget clearly ran out, because there's moments where the two are just clearly toys on a landscape just being waved about by two people. It's amazing. It's just such fun to watch. You can't take this movie seriously, and it's just a great time. Yeah, we have bland human characters and there's a little bit of racism in it, but when we have so much kaiju action, it can be looked over because this movie is just so much fun. I keep saying it, but it really is. If you want a great Godzilla movie to watch with some mates and have a laugh with, this is one of the perfect picks. It's sort of a so bad it's good in areas, and this movie does generally have some good moments, I'm not going to deny, but there's also some general so bad it's good moments. It's just a great time. You have two icons fighting each other, and it doesn't disappoint. I just can't wait for the rematch in a few years, but it's going to have to be something special to beat this movie, just for how fun it is. It's just a great time, a great movie to watch with mates, and just laugh with and riff with. It's a perfect MST3K movie, and I hope they do cover it one day. But yeah, King Kong vs Godzilla is just a great time, and I recommend everyone watch it. Number 14. The Return of Godzilla. You can say this is one of the most important films in the Godzilla franchise because this is sort of the baseline for every single Godzilla movie after it. It takes Godzilla back to his nuclear roots and makes him not really a bad guy but a force of nature that the humans have to deal with, which is sort of how Godzilla becomes from every movie from here on out. This is also the first Godzilla movie where the military start their trend of building some really high-tech super weapon to try and defeat Godzilla, and this one's the first version of the Super X, and it looks really goofy. It kind of looks a bit like a dumpling, a big marshmallow dumpling. But that being said, I do like the fight that it has with Godzilla. It's a good break from the normal Godzilla vs military battle in this movie. And the special effects, while not the best in the Godzilla series, you can clearly see that there was an updated budget and updated special effects, and it really does look much better than the last movie. This is one of the Godzilla movies that actually knows how to shoot Godzilla from low angles and dark lighting to make him actually look huge and tall and imposing. And the updated building special effects really add to the whole thing that he is actually a giant monster and not a guy in a rubber suit. And I love how this movie made a giant animatronic version of Godzilla for the movie. However, that's sort of the big flaw with this movie is, well, how Godzilla looks. He doesn't look bad. Most of the body is a really good shape. It's just the face. He really has some derpy looking expressions from time to time. Sometimes having his eyes point in different directions, which just make him look really stupid. It kind of makes him look unintentionally hilarious at times. But also the human characters actually have some characters. And I'm talking about the original Japanese version, not the American cut. Forget that thing. While some characters have some nice arcs, it is a case of there are far too many of them. But like I said, we do get some good arcs in this movie, like the main scientist. He's a nice guy and you do like him. And you want to see him survive. And also, this is one of the few movies at the time to have Russian characters who aren't the bad guys. Yes, I know the American cut changed that, but the Russians in this movie are actually sort of the good guys. Especially the heroic sacrifice at the end that the Russian guy tries to do to stop the nuclear warhead being launched. You wouldn't see that in an American movie. In fact, they changed it in the American movie for him to purposely launch the missile. But also this movie has the most out of tone character in any Godzilla movie because we have this homeless guy. And he is just so out of place as this comic relief character who just shows up for about 20 minutes. He is just completely tonally just mismatched with the rest of the movie. It's sort of insane. You have these scenes of Godzilla destroying buildings and killing people and destroying the Super X, and then you just cut back to this homeless guy being quirky and doing quirky, humorous stuff. It just doesn't make much sense. But he also has the greatest shot ever in any Godzilla movie. Well, unintentionally hilarious, of him doing an Indiana Jones run away from Godzilla. But yeah, he's really the big flaw with this movie, how he's just sort of tonally out of place. But apart from that, this is a good start to the Heisei era. It's a good Godzilla movie if you want to start watching Godzilla movies. Number 13. Godzilla 2014. Another movie that has slipped down in my opinion since I rewatched it recently. Godzilla 2014 is a good movie. I'm not going to say it's a bad movie in any way. It's a really well made movie. It has some great cinematography and some great acting from Bryan Cranston and Ken Watanabe, and the special effects are really, really good. The best that Godzilla has ever had. And some great moments which are basically every time Godzilla is on screen. The build-up is really, really good, and I do like the Mutos. There is plenty to like about this movie. I'm not going to deny it's a good movie, but there's plenty of problems with it. The biggest not being that they cut away from Godzilla. Loads of Godzilla movies do that. The biggest problem is, after Bryan Cranston dies, we only have Ken Watanabe and Sally Hawkins as the only interesting characters in this movie, and they're not in it enough. Because my god, Brody is so dull, and I mean dull. Apart from his name, he has zero interesting character traits. He is just bland, boring military guy. And that's the biggest problem with this movie. It's okay to keep cutting away from the kaiju action to the human stuff if the human stuff was interesting, but it's not. Hardly any of the humans are interesting in this movie, and that's why people got frustrated when it kept cutting away. We didn't want to go back to these human characters when what we were missing out was some of the best Godzilla action we've ever seen. This does look like it's going to be a fault that they correct in Godzilla King of the Monsters. But yeah, this movie I wouldn't say is badly acted, but there are some of the characters are really badly acted. I mean, the kid character is, well, it's a child actor, so, you know, you can't really expect much, but yeah, he's not very good. But there are some absolute great scenes in this movie, some of the best in the Godzilla franchise, like the bridge scene, or the airport scene. All of that stuff is really, really good, so I can't say that this movie is bad. It's not bad in any way. It's a very well made movie. The biggest problem with it is the characters, but everything else is so good. The cinematography is just so good. There's no shaky cam, so you can see everything that's going on in its full glory. The soundtrack is really good. And yes, I know they're not using the Godzilla theme, but hey, they're going to fix that mistake in King of the Monsters. So this movie is, well, it's not necessarily a brilliant movie. It's a good movie. I definitely do like it. There's a lot to like in this movie. It's just one really big flaw with it that stops it being in the top 10, and that's the characters. Let's hope that King of the Monsters corrects these mistakes and we get a fantastic Godzilla movie. Because Godzilla 2014, it's good foundations for the rest of the Monsterverse. And we got Kong Skull Island from it. So yeah, it's definitely a good movie. It's definitely got a good foundation to it, and we're going to get some good stuff in the future. Number 12. Godzilla vs. Biollante. A movie that has got a resurgence in popularity recently, and while I do think it is good, I have seen some people claim that it is the best Godzilla movie ever made, and well, I'm sorry, I'm not going to lie, it's not the best, and that's why it's number 12. It's a really good Godzilla movie, and it tries something different, which is always good, but also keeps the same elements of a Godzilla movie that makes it a Godzilla movie, and also has a lot of elements that will go forth into other Godzilla movies, like Biollante is the first Godzilla monster to be created from Godzilla's DNA, something the Godzilla franchise loves to do in future movies. And Biollante is one of the most unique and interesting kaijus in the Godzilla franchise. I also adore how they brought Biollante to life. Behind the scenes, just so much great work went into making Biollante as realistic and bring it to life. It's just amazing. This movie also has a lot of the templates for the rest of the Heisei era. This is the movie that introduces Miki, my favourite Godzilla character of all time. And her first movie really sets up her character very well. We also have the mad scientist character, but in this movie you 100% understand why he is like this. He's not a bad guy mad scientist. He is just a scientist that's been driven to desperation and madness due to his circumstances of losing his daughter. Him bringing Biollante to life isn't because he wants to destroy Godzilla, it's basically his last chance he sees of keeping his daughter alive. This movie also has one of the most badass military characters I've ever seen. He is just a joy to watch on every scene that he's in. It's a shame that he dies because I would have loved to have seen him pop up in more Heisei era movies. And oh yeah, this movie has Biowar in the soundtrack, which is one of the best pieces of Godzilla movies despite the fact that it's so out of place. It is basically funky disco Godzilla theme, and it's just a great listen. Also, the military stuff with Godzilla is great. With the Super X2 using the reflective plates to use Godzilla's own beam against him is a great idea, and of course, being a military plan, it backfires and goes horribly wrong. And it's one of the few Godzilla movies where they don't just try shooting at him to try and kill him. They use anti-nuclear bacteria to try and basically destroy Godzilla's nuclear element, which will make him incredibly weak and possibly even killable. Every scene with Godzilla is damn near perfect. They use Godzilla as a force of nature perfectly. He's not the villain by any means. Biolante's just caught his interest. And once he gets released, he's going to check it out. He's not evil. None of the kaijus are evil. They're just there, so the military have to deal with him. My only real problem is the stuff with Godzilla and Biollante is very short. The final fight is one of the shortest in the whole franchise, and it's sort of disappointing when we have this amazing Biollante suit, how basically it's barely on screen for more than 5 minutes. The fight also just sort of stops. It's really weird. They're fighting each other, Godzilla shoots his beam down Biollante's mouth, and then Godzilla just walks off. The movie forgets to have some kind of climax. And there are some times where this movie just turns into a James Bond riff-off. And that's because the director really wanted to make a James Bond movie, so he sort of sneaked in as much as he could in this movie. But yeah, this movie is good, and I'm glad that it got a resurgence in popularity in recent years. Its popularity is there for a reason. I do think it's a good Godzilla movie. I just don't think it's worthy of the top 10. Number 11. Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. Okay, while making this list and ranking all these movies, I basically couldn't really separate the last 3 Godzilla movies on this list. So while they are numbered from 11 to 9, really on different days I could put them on any different number because they are just all so good, it's hard to separate them all. So yeah, while this movie is number 11 and just outside the top 10, that doesn't mean I don't think it's an awesome movie. I do think it should be in the top 10, but the other 3 Mechagodzilla movies I think are just slightly better than it. This movie is awesome. It's a great celebration of Godzilla's anniversary. It doesn't have that cheap feel to it like the later Showa movies had. And I love Mechagodzilla's design. And also I like King Caesar, as he is probably one of the most overly hyped kaijus of all time. He spends the whole movie being hyped up as this amazing defender of Japan. And then he gets his ass kicked as soon as he gets on screen. Also, I feel sorry for Anguirus getting his ass kicked as well, and he doesn't really get any sort of revenge like King Caesar does. He just gets his ass kicked and then disappears for the rest of the movie. But yeah, the action in this movie is just so good. It doesn't take very long to get going at all. The fake Godzilla of the movie shows up quite soon on, and then it's just, once this fake Godzilla shows up, this movie just is a joyride from start to finish. The only real thing I don't get is, why was Mechagodzilla dressed up as Godzilla? Like, I don't get the aliens' reasoning behind it. Were they trying to destroy Godzilla's credibility, make him a villain again? I really don't get it. It just doesn't make that much sense. It also makes Mechagodzilla less effective in combat because he can't use his full arsenal of weaponry. So it doesn't really make that much sense why they would do that. I really don't get why in movie they would have disguised Mechagodzilla as Godzilla. It just doesn't make that much sense. But that's really just a nitpick because this movie never gets boring. It has some of the best fights in the Godzilla franchise, and also feels like a Tarantino movie at times, with just the amount of blood that's on screen. And also the way that Godzilla defeats Mechagodzilla feels like something out of Dragon Ball Z, where he basically just pulls something out of his ass to defeat Mechagodzilla. That whole magnet power just comes the hell out of nowhere. Has no real build up to it, it just sort of happens, but it also makes Godzilla look like a Jedi, making him even more awesome than he was. But yeah, it's Godzilla. Why do you need an explanation for why he can do this? He just can, because he's Godzilla. The one thing I think that's holding this movie back are the human characters. Some of them are interesting, but it's just sort of a case of, again, there are far too many characters that none of them really stand out. Most of them are just sort of there are just too many of them. Also, that whole 4-minute song to wake up King Caesar really did feel like filler, and they would just put it in there because they needed to make the runtime. It sort of felt like a Gamera movie where they just had the random song for some reason. But on the movie soundtrack, this movie has a great soundtrack. It's just so high energy and just full of great tracks. I think it's up there as some of the best of this era of Godzilla. And yes, this movie does use a lot of Godzilla tropes that we see in past movies, but you know, it never gets boring. It uses those tropes really well. It's a great joyride, and it's a great time to have. I really do enjoy this movie. It's a great celebration of Godzilla's anniversary. 10. Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2. Continuing our trek for the Mechagodzilla films, we get to the Heisei era entry, and it's a really strong midpoint for the whole series. It sets up the ending for the series really well, but is also a great solo movie on its own. It's very well paced, it never gets boring, and has plenty of Godzilla action. But it's very well spread out. It's not just Godzilla constantly on screen for about an hour. Each act has a Godzilla moment. The start has a Godzilla fight, the middle has a Godzilla fight, and the ending has a Godzilla fight, but it's very well paced out. As well as giving a really good update to Mechagodzilla. This is the movie that changes him from an alien evil robot to basically something that the humans made. To probably the cost of the entire country, if you think about how much this would have cost. And while it's not my favourite Mechagodzilla design, it's pretty good. It's definitely well rounded and well balanced. And I also think Super Mechagodzilla upgrade looks absolutely badass. We also get a really good update to Rodan, who basically is the Krillin of the whole movie, getting his ass kicked throughout the whole movie, and even when he gets his power up, he basically spends the whole time getting his ass kicked. Also, what I like about this movie is they don't treat Godzilla like he is the antagonist of this movie, he is the bad guy. Basically, he is just a kaiju, and G-Force basically just want to kill it. There's no real out-and-out bad guy of the movie. This also gives us the nice addition of Godzilla Jr., which is the way that they should have done Godzilla's son, and they absolutely do it perfectly. This movie also has a lot of really good characters, but mostly it's the returning cast that are the standouts for this whole entire picture. And the reason why this isn't my favourite is because the main male lead is a really annoying asshole. Basically, he spends the whole time not taking anything seriously and constantly gets rewarded for it, which, you know, it just kind of gets annoying really quickly. He's arrogant and cocky and constantly messes up, and breaks numerous military rules, but he just keeps getting rewarded, and by the end of it he's absolutely fine. You know, if this was the Japanese military, he would have been court-martialed the moment he didn't show up for his first battle. But also, I will say that this movie has a fantastic soundtrack. It is one of the best of the entire series. Redoing classic tracks from the original Godzilla series and just updating them and making them really epic. The main Mechagodzilla theme is the absolute highlight of this amazing soundtrack. I could honestly make an argument for it being the best piece of music in the entire Godzilla franchise. It is just that good. The fights as well are good. The problem is that, well, with some Heisei era movies, they become basically two monsters firing their beams at each other for 10 minutes. And this movie sort of answers it by making Mechagodzilla beam-proof, so the other kaijus actually have to find a way around it, instead of just firing their beam at him. Even though Godzilla does seem to keep doing that, even though he knows that the beam has no effect. Oh well. But that being said, I think the best fight is Godzilla vs. Rodan at the start of the movie, so the movie never really tops that sort of fight scene. But I won't deny that the ending is absolutely amazing, with Godzilla going Super Saiyan and just blowing the shit out of Mechagodzilla. It is basically Godzilla 100% done with this shit. And then it follows with an ending which is quite somber really, with Godzilla adopting Junior. It's a good solid movie that sets up the ending of the Heisei era very well. Number 9. Godzilla against Mechagodzilla. After rewatching all the Mechagodzilla movies, there is one big reason why this is the best Mechagodzilla movie. In my opinion, Akira Yashu, and I am sorry I am butchering her name, is one of the best characters in the entire franchise. She's well written, well acted, and has an amazing arc. Yeah, they put her front and center on the poster for a reason. Yes, her character type is one that we've seen before. She's the Godzilla character that wants to get revenge on Godzilla because Godzilla did something to her past and she wants to kill him and get revenge and all that stuff. But this is the best take on it because she doesn't blame Godzilla for her past. She blames herself for what happened in her mistake in the past, which got people killed. She doesn't blame Godzilla for people getting killed. It was her fault. So by trying to kill Godzilla, she's trying to basically redeem herself for her mistake in her past. This is basically the character from Planet of Monsters and City on the Edge of Battle done 100% better than the guy in the anime. She hates Godzilla, but she also hates herself because it was her fault that people got killed. She is such a good character. This movie wouldn't be anywhere near as good if she was written badly. And everything else is pretty damn good. This is my favourite Mechagodzilla design. I love how they use the 1954 skeleton as sort of the basically the skeleton of the entire mecha unit. It's also one of the most realistic looking Mechagodzillas. I could actually see this being built. It wouldn't work, but I could see it happening. My only issue with this whole movie is the whole Mechagodzilla going out of control because it remembers its Godzilla storyline. It's all set up and then it's just forgotten about. And the sequel to this movie didn't really use it at all, so it was sort of just a complete waste of time. Speaking of waste of time, the Absolute Zero Cannon. It's a great idea and I love how they use it in the movie, how they just keep setting it up to basically be the weapon that will kill Godzilla, and it fails every single time they try to use it. As for everything else, well, I never really liked this version of Godzilla. I'm not saying that he's bad, I'm not saying the design is bad, I just didn't like how this portrayal of Godzilla sort of made him look weak. And it's the same here, because Godzilla's supposed to be the antagonist, the bad guy of the movie, so he's supposed to be the biggest threat. You know, he's supposed to be a real challenge and the military are supposed to be outclassed, and Mechagodzilla could be the last chance to defeat Godzilla. But it never really came off that way. Mechagodzilla basically outclasses Godzilla in every single aspect, to make Godzilla just look weak and not much of a threat. I mean, the first time the two fight, Godzilla runs away. But that's sort of just a nitpick really, because everything else about this movie is just fantastic and has the best Godzilla character in the entire franchise. And I will stand by that. It's well paced, has a really good script, has some great fight scenes. It's the best Mechagodzilla movie in my opinion. Number 8. Ghidorah, the three-headed monster. One of the most important movies in the Godzilla franchise because a lot of elements would be used in later films from this movie. First of all, it introduces Rodan into the franchise, but also introduced the most iconic adversary of the whole entire franchise, King Ghidorah. And that's just one of the best things about this movie, is the monster action. Yes, the plot is a bit bizarre, but really it's only something the Japanese could do, so it's absolutely fine. It's bizarre in the right way. There is a really good human plot around this whole thing, about the whole alien possession, and they don't believe that this princess is an alien, but you know, they're going to try and protect her and they're going to listen to her. And the Mothra twins helping her is also great too, and I just really like the Assassins plot for some reason. I just find it really enjoyable. It's a very good action point to have in between all the monster action, so you don't get bored by just listening to two humans talk for half an hour. But the biggest reason why I like this movie is King Ghidorah, and just the build-up around the reveal of King Ghidorah. They set up King Ghidorah as this planet-killing monster that just goes around from planet to planet, destroying things just for the fun of it. It really paints Ghidorah as this real evil threat, and the build-up to its grand reveal is some of the best in the whole franchise. How the meteor just starts to glow and then it sparks and then the music just builds and builds and builds, and then there's this huge explosion and there it is, King Ghidorah. It is King Ghidorah's movie, that's why it's the poster child for this one. Mothra, Godzilla and Rodan are more side characters to this movie. It is all about Ghidorah. But all three of them do get their moments. Rodan dropping Godzilla on some telephone lines, Godzilla basically laughing and swearing, and Mothra webbing up the two to get them to listen. Yes, Mothra in a larval stage doesn't really do a lot, and well, she barely shows up until the last 20 minutes of the movie. And the whole Mothra negotiating to the others to get them to fight Ghidorah is where you can see they start to turn Godzilla into a more of a hero character, a more kid-friendly character. But also benefits the monsters that it doesn't make them just mindless animals that are fighting each other, it gives them character. The human story is good. It actually makes the long gaps in between monster actions not that boring. It's a very interesting thriller with the whole assassins trying to kill a princess storyline. It never gets boring, and the final battle is a great brawl between the three kaijus and Ghidorah. It's the birth of the monster brawl, and I cannot wait to see how they basically sort of remake this movie next year. Will it be a remake or will it be something completely new but just with the same kaijus? Who knows? We'll see. But it's going to have to be something pretty special to top this. Number 7. Godzilla vs. Destroyer. Talk about an emotional gut punch of a finale. This is a sad movie. From beginning to end, this movie is just an emotional, dark tearjerker. I would say it's the most emotional Godzilla movie that's ever been made. It is just so dark. And it's mostly revolving around Destroyer, who's one of the most sadistic and evil kaijus in the whole franchise. It's just a sad goodbye not only to Godzilla, but also all these characters we've come to know and enjoy in the past 7 movies. And none of them really get that much of a happy ending. It's just a misery from start to finish, but in the good way. You really do feel like this is an ending not only to the Heisei era, but to Godzilla as a whole. They could have quite easily just finished Godzilla from this point. This is also one of the best acted Godzilla movies in my opinion. All the characters and actors are just amazing. The returning cast, especially Mickey, they're just amazing. And it's one of the Godzilla movies where you can tell what Godzilla's emotions are and what he is thinking at a given moment. This is the first and so far only Godzilla movie where Godzilla cries. And it's for Junior. Oh god, I feel so sorry for Junior as well. From his birth to his basically death in this movie, he has gone through hell. And this movie is not kind to him. Where he has his first fight and basically gets tortured by Destroyer, but also gets his first win. So yay, good for him, and then he gets killed. So screw that. But yeah, his first win really does feel like he's becoming next in line to becoming the king of the monsters. And it really earns the ending of Godzilla's death, which is one of the best endings of the whole franchise. One of the best endings in films in my opinion. It is just so good. How they treat Godzilla in this movie is basically, it's a sacrifice, it's an ending. The choir and basically just 5 minutes of watching Godzilla die. It's so sad. Also, Destroyer's design. This is basically the closest we'll get to Godzilla vs. Satan. It's such a good design. Destroyer looks like a final boss in like a Contra game or something like that. It's so good. It's such a good, evil looking design. My only issue I have with the movie is the whole Oxygen Destroyer plotline. Because, you know, the first movie established that all evidence of how to make an Oxygen Destroyer was destroyed. But then this random guy can just do it. Maybe it's the dub, or maybe I'm remembering it wrong, but they give little to no reason of why this random guy can suddenly make an Oxygen Destroyer. But that's all I have wrong with this movie. Everything else about this movie is great. The fights are great, the acting is great, it's just an amazingly well-paced movie, and it's never boring. And the military have a weapon that's actually effective against the monster. Hooray! Going out on a high point for the military at least. Godzilla's death is absolutely perfect. I couldn't honestly think of a better death scene they could give Godzilla. I can't see any future movie topping this either. But yeah, this movie is amazing in a depressing sort of way, and it's an amazing ending to the Heisei era. Yes, I cried when Godzilla died, but you did too. Number 6. Godzilla Final Wars. Yep, I put Final Wars at number 6. I put it above some of the best of the whole franchise, and I know some of you say it's a completely stupid movie, and that's why I love it, because yes, it's a completely stupid movie, and it has bad acting, and it has bad CGI, but I don't care, because it's the most fun you can have with a Godzilla movie. It is insane, and it is just so much fun. I watched this movie from beginning to end with a huge smile on my face, and the fact that this is Godzilla's 50th anniversary movie, they do it in the best way possible, with a big, wild movie. And everyone's invited, including you, so you can just sit back and enjoy the insanity and just sheer fun and enjoyment of this movie. It is a celebration of Godzilla in the best way they can. It is just so much fun. You can even tell that the actors in this movie are just having a blast. With the classic Showa era acting and plot lines, combined with a sort of Matrix-esque fight scenes, it's just amazing. I love every single thing about it. I love how they update the whole aliens coming back to take over the world sort of plot line. I love how they bring back the Exilians as sort of like Matrix goth characters now. Oh, and the main villain, he is one of the best things about this movie. With his overacting, is just so badass. You can tell the actor was having a ball with this role. The only real bad thing I can say about this movie is that the middle is a bit slow, but apart from that, it's just an amazing fun watch. This is the most badass Godzilla has ever been in any movie. He is so OP in this movie, but it doesn't matter because nothing can stop him. The bad guys throw everything they can at him and nothing works. He just walks forward, kicking ass and taking names. Yes, it does result in some of the fight scenes being a bit short, but you don't care when Godzilla is just being this much of a badass. Also, I do love the soundtrack. It's just got so much high energy to it. It's at times even sounding like a club theme. It's probably the soundtrack I have listened to the most. And I love how some of these tracks are in a Godzilla movie. It's just amazing how cheesy fun this is. I love it. It just makes me so happy watching this movie. I don't get those people who hate this movie saying it's stupid and it doesn't take Godzilla seriously. Well, yeah, I mean, it's Godzilla's celebration of his 50th anniversary. It's a big party. It's a big celebration. You don't take that seriously. You shouldn't take this movie seriously. It's just a fun ride. A celebration of Godzilla. A celebration of just the character, the monster, the kaiju, and the legacy. It's the anniversary in the best way possible. It's a fun, fantastic time, and you end it with a huge smile on your face. I love it. Number 5. Mothra vs. Godzilla. When I heard that this was one of the best movies in the entire franchise, I honestly thought it was going to be a bit overhyped, but then when I came to watch it, it actually does live up to the hype. This is one of the best movies in the whole franchise. And you can tell a lot of Godzilla came from this movie. It's just a great standout Godzilla movie. It has Godzilla just being a total badass, taking a ton of punishment and just shrugging it off like he's the Terminator. They try damn near everything to stop Godzilla in this movie. Tanks, bombs, the US military dropping a net and firing with electricity, damn near everything, and none of it works. He just keeps going forward like an unstoppable force of nature, and that's basically what Godzilla is. He's basically like Michael Myers, emotionless and just evil in this movie. Just doesn't care who you are, doesn't even bother to get to know you or anything like that. He just sees you, he will kill you, and he will just move on to his next victim. I also really like how they use Mothra in this movie. Yes, they keep her as like a spiritual goddess kind of character, but she's not this like all authoritarian good kaiju. She actually starts the movie incredibly pissed off at the humans for not returning her young in the egg, and is perfectly happy with Godzilla destroying Japan because the humans basically just messed with her. She doesn't want to help the people who are keeping her kids captive. She needs convincing to actually go and help people. I kind of do like that. It's sort of what Tokyo SOS sort of missed. I mean, this Mothra and the fairies basically tell the human characters when they go all the way to her island for help to, well, screw you, you're on your own. It's the only real Godzilla movie to really do that to Mothra. They've never really done it before or since. It would be an interesting thing to revisit. But also what makes this movie stand out are the human characters, especially the villains. These evil businessmen are the evil businessmen to the most degree. Especially the main guy, he's just so casual about everything. Especially during the end when he has a fight scene with the other main villain guy, when Godzilla's just right outside and he acts so casual about it. He also acts so casual about shooting and killing his partner, friend, who he just had to fight with. He is a great human villain. One of the best in the series. And well, the good human characters, they aren't really standouts, but they are well written and there's nothing particularly bad about them. They're just, normal human characters. But also the highlight for this movie are the special effects. This, I think, are probably the best Showa special effects and kaiju suits in the whole series. In this era. You actually feel like Godzilla is huge and actually, in these huge settings, there's so many great attention to details in this scene. The little pipelines that Godzilla destroys when he first wakes up, there's those little details like that. You don't really notice at first glance, but upon repeat viewing you see all the little details that make Godzilla look like, yes, he is still kind of looking like a man in a rubber suit, but he looks like he is actually a kaiju in a real city in some scenes. And yes, not a lot really happens in this movie until about halfway in, but these human characters are interesting enough and well written enough that it doesn't really affect the movie that much. You can sort of bypass the normal human talking scenes because they're nicely well-rounded characters, so it's not boring. It's not basically just humans spouting exposition. They have actual conversations, they act like actual people. It really does work. And the final fights at the end of the movie are really good, and it's surprising considering they're basically Godzilla versus a puppet. They're very well done fights. I think they're probably the best Godzilla versus a puppet fights in the whole series. But yeah, this movie is just really well rounded. Everything feels like it's just very smooth and very well polished from the previous Godzilla movies, but as well adds new things, and you can see where a lot of future Godzilla movies get their references from this movie. It wasn't overhyped for me, and that's a really good thing. It really is one of the best of the best. Number 4. Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah. Oh hell yes, I love this movie. This is the best Heisei era movie by a long way. With a plot they've never really done before or since, and some of the best acting and best stories in the whole entire franchise. Well, best Japanese acting. Don't listen to the English dub, it's pretty bad. And just some of the best standout moments in the whole franchise. I also think this brings the definitive Godzilla origin story, much like how Killing Joke became the definitive Joker origin story. Yes, there's been different takes on the Godzilla origin in different eras, but I definitely see this as the definitive origin for Godzilla. It also has a really original story. Yes, it's a time travel story, and it's actually the only time travel story in the Godzilla franchise, but it's also a very original time travel story because it doesn't just use going back in time to prevent Godzilla from doing stuff. It uses time loops, it uses going backwards and forwards, it uses paradoxes, it uses loads of other things that not many time travel stories use. My only real nitpick is the whole King Ghidorah not being an alien sort of thing. But that's really my only issue with the movie. I prefer King Ghidorah being an alien, and that's it. The rest of this movie is so good. All the human characters are well written and well fleshed out. This also has Mickey in it, and they give it plenty of character personalities that will be continued on in later movies. And yes, the main male lead is a writer who's got a bit of an ego about himself, but when he does have an ego about himself and starts to brag, the movie just shoots him down the moment they can. This movie doesn't even start off slow, it starts off with the time travelers arriving. It doesn't waste any time. It knows what you're here for, it just gets right to it. I also really like the soundtrack for this movie. It's some of the best in the whole franchise. This is the movie which kind of establishes the Godzilla soundtrack for the rest of the Heisei era, with big orchestral music numbers and big brass instruments signifying the monster's just weight and strength and presence. And also Godzilla and King Ghidorah in this movie are just perfect. King Ghidorah, even though he is yet again under the control of an advanced race, he is still really threatening and really imposing. You really get the sense of evil that comes off this kaiju. And Godzilla is just a badass. Yes, he's not really the good guy or the bad guy, he's just another kaiju. He's just the force of nature he's supposed to be. But they really use him well in this. Both the kaijus are such badasses in this movie. And then we get to the Mecha King Ghidorah, because of course you would give Godzilla's main antagonist a mecha version, because yeah, why shouldn't it just be Mechagodzilla? Why not have Mecha King Ghidorah and Mecha Mothra and all that sort of stuff? That would have been great. And for not being in the movie that much, he really does leave an impact. It's a really iconic design, and his abilities in fight is just one of the best in the whole franchise. I also love the little things about this movie, like the time travel part of the movie where they go back to the Japanese fighting the Americans on the island. It doesn't paint the Americans as the bad guys, not at all. They're just basically, they're in a war. They're trying to kill the Japanese, the last holdouts on this island, and the Japanese aren't the bad guys either. They're basically just two warring sides against each other. And I also like how this movie clearly rips off Terminator. Like, there's even a scene that is basically the same sequence from Terminator 2. But that's funny how they do that. It's funny how they rip it off. It basically wraps this whole movie up in a perfect Godzilla movie. It just really is that good. It's unique, but also does similar things to previous Godzilla movies and more Godzilla movies going forward. It's a great first Godzilla movie. If you want to get someone interested in Godzilla, this is one of the perfect first ones to show them. Number 3. Shin Godzilla. Oh yes, Shin Godzilla, the perfect retelling of the classic Gojira, but updating it to a modern age. This movie was a response to the Fukushima nuclear disaster, which I didn't bring up in my original review because I kind of forgot about it, but I'll bring it up now. Very much like how the original Godzilla was a response to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, this Godzilla was a response to the Fukushima nuclear disaster, and the Japanese government basically screwing everything up. It's the only other Godzilla movie, apart from the original one, to be a response to an actual disaster that happened in Japan. And this one does it in a very different way. It uses Godzilla as an allegory, but in a different way. Whereas the first Godzilla was used as an allegory for the nuclear bomb, Shin Godzilla is used as an allegory for the Japanese reliance on nuclear energy, and also a complete criticism of the Japanese government, with all the red tapes and different meetings and all the bureaucracy that happens, which in this movie they cut with Godzilla destroying stuff, people getting killed, lives being ruined, but then we cut back to more meetings to basically emphasise the point that this is the problem with bureaucracy. It's a waste of time and waste of lives. It uses the symbolism absolutely perfectly. Way better than anything Zack Snyder could do when he just shoves it in your face for the entire movie. This one weaves it into the storyline and makes it essential instead of just pointing out the metaphors constantly. I really also love this version of Godzilla. You can tell it was done by the guy who directed the end of Evangelion, because this Godzilla looks like it would fit right into that universe. And I will say, I do think this version of Godzilla is good for this movie and shouldn't be made into a series of movies. This version of Godzilla should be a one and done Godzilla. And yes, this movie starts off with way too many characters, but that's the whole point of it. It's supposed to show how needless most of these people are, and then it doesn't become a problem because halfway through the movie, half the cast is just unceremoniously killed off. In one of the best sequences in the entire Godzilla franchise. In fact, I would say the best sequence in the entire Godzilla franchise. This movie is just amazing. No wonder it swept all the Japanese movie awards. And I also kind of don't get the complaints that some people have about this movie. Maybe it's because they're not Japanese, so they don't quite, understand the political climate and how things work in Japan. Who knows, maybe it is basically just, a cultural thing that can affect your enjoyment of the movie. I also don't get the complaint that they reuse classic Toho sound effects and soundtracks. Because, well, yeah, tons of Toho movies have done that in the past. It's nothing new, and for God's sake, if you're complaining that they're reusing some of the best soundtracks in the entire franchise as well as adding some new ones which just bring this movie up to an amazing level, then you're really complaining about something being too good. Speaking of too good, this movie just shoots Godzilla absolutely perfectly, with handheld cams, low angles, just really intimidating shots that make Godzilla look like this kind of god that has come among men and is basically just there to smite humanity for their failures and their mistakes. I just cannot sing praises of it enough. It's one of my all-time favourite. That's why it's number 3, of course. It's a great one-off Godzilla movie, and I hope it never gets a sequel. Number 2. Godzilla. So some of you may be surprised that this isn't number 1. But here's the thing, I think the original Godzilla movie is the best all-round Godzilla movie. No, not Godzilla King of the Monsters with Raymond Bird. That's an Americanization of a masterpiece that completely misses the point and disregards the true meaning of the film. But yeah, anyway, Godzilla I think is the perfect movie without a single flaw. Everything about this movie is damn near perfect. The story is so well balanced and so well paced. The characters are amazing and go through just amazing arcs. The acting is just astonishing for the time. And it's so dark, especially for a movie in the 1950s. What 1950s movies do you know that show children looking over the dead body of their mother? Or a mother holding her children saying it's okay, they're going to be dead soon? It's so dark in the right way. It's such a gut punch of a movie. And it absolutely should be. This movie basically just shows the pain and destruction Japan had to deal with after the atomic bombing. It doesn't pull any punches in any way, and it's so great for that. And what's so great about it is that they could have easily made America the villains of this movie, or made like an American character or some sort of symbolism for America, but no. They don't make any particular country a villain, they make the atomic bomb the villain in Godzilla. It is the symbol of nuclear destruction and the symbol of the evil of it. And Godzilla is like the atomic bomb in just how they use him. He is an unstoppable, unkillable machine that you can't escape. You can't beat him. Everything you have that could be used to destroy him, nothing will work. He will just keep coming. There is nothing you can do to stop this unstoppable force. The only thing that can stop it is an even worse weapon. And that brings me to the best character in the movie, and possibly one of the best characters in all the film, Dr. Shirazawa. Yes, he might look like a Bond villain, but he is one of the best characters in all the film. He's a scientist that discovered micro-oxygen and realised what kind of power and damage this thing could do, and was horrified by it. But being a scientist, he couldn't just leave his discovery alone. He had to see if there could be potential benefits for this discovery. He had to see what he could do with it to bring what kind of good could come from it. But he doesn't want his secret to come out, because if it does come out, the evil it could be used for is basically the Oppenheimer character. He's discovered something terrible that he should never have discovered, but as a scientist can't leave it alone because he sees it as his duty to see what benefits he can create from this discovery. And it takes so much to convince him to turn it into a weapon that could destroy Godzilla. Even after Godzilla's leveled most of Tokyo, he still won't do it because he doesn't want this discovery to come out, because he knows the evil it could cause could be even worse than Godzilla. And then when he does agree to do it, just the way he acts about it is just so perfect. He destroys every single note he has about his discovery because he doesn't want anyone to find out about it, because he knows what evil it could cause. And just his sacrifice at the end of the movie, because he knows once the weapon is used, people are going to want to recreate it, so he has to destroy every last bit of evidence on how to create one, which includes himself. He's just so good. Everything in this movie is just so good. And being the first Godzilla movie, it absolutely nails Godzilla right off the bat. He's this tall, imposing, unstoppable figure of destruction that cannot be damaged or hurt in any way. He doesn't have much of a character. He is basically just a monster in this movie. They do flesh him out in later movies, but that's kind of perfect for this movie because Godzilla is an allegory for the atomic bomb. The bomb doesn't have any personality. The monster shouldn't have any personality. It should just be a mindless killing machine. I just goddamn love it. It is, in my opinion, the best Godzilla movie ever made. So why is it number 2? Well, while I think it's the best Godzilla movie ever made, it's not my favourite Godzilla movie ever made. It's a perfect movie, but my number 1 I just enjoy watching more, and well, I think you've already figured out what it is. Number 1. Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah, giant monsters, all-out attack. To the surprise of no one who has already been watching my reviews in the past, this is my favourite Godzilla movie of all time. Yes, it's not as good as Godzilla, but in my mind, this is my absolute personal favourite movie of the entire Godzilla franchise, because in a way I don't think there's any Godzilla movie like it. It's so spiritual and mystical, using Godzilla as an allegory for what the Japanese did in the Second World War, as sort of like the revenge, the vengeance of all the lives that the Japanese took. This movie has Godzilla as the flat-out villain, and unlike Tokyo SOS, Godzilla is by far and away the absolute unstoppable biggest threat, most powerful thing in this movie. He is unstoppable. Nothing can stand in his way. The military can do nothing. The Guardian monsters are severely outclassed. You just see Godzilla as this imposing, unstoppable symbol of death and destruction, a punishment that has come to Japan for its mistakes of the past. And this is personally my favourite Godzilla design. Those white eyes give Godzilla just such a threatening look to him. It gives him no emotional face. He is a symbol of death. And I also like the updating of the kaiju in this movie. We have Baragon back, who hasn't been in a movie for years, and this is the first Godzilla movie to have a female in the kaiju suit. There was a female inside Baragon because they needed someone flexible enough to fit in the tiny Baragon suit, so they got a female gymnast, and she does an amazing job. This also has my favourite Mothra look. She looks like Mothra, but she actually looks like a monster as well. She doesn't look like, you know, basically a fluffy, big, cute, huggable kaiju. And the same with King Ghidorah. You can tell that this King Ghidorah is a Earth King Ghidorah. It looks like an ancient dragon from mystical times. So I don't really mind that King Ghidorah is the good guy of this movie, because he kind of looks like the good guy in this. It's a reimagining that sort of works. I mean, if it was a continuation, a sequel to another Godzilla movie, then it wouldn't work at all. The fact that this is basically just standalone, it kind of fits this universe. And the kaiju fights, I think, are the best in the whole franchise. Godzilla vs. Baragon and Godzilla vs. Mothra and King Ghidorah are two of the best fights in the whole franchise, because they know how to use these fight scenes to make them entertaining, but also show what goes on in these fight scenes, because this is one of the few Godzilla movies that shows the destruction that these fights cause. You see people getting crushed, trampled, caught up in the destruction of these two Goliaths fighting each other. Yes, it's fun watching these kaijus go at each other, but it doesn't let you forget that there are people in the way of these fights. The movie actually has sort of a dark sense of humour when it comes to people's lives in this movie. Like Godzilla approaching the hospital, that scene. Someone dies in that scene, but it's sort of used as a comical effect. It's really odd, especially coming from the fact that this movie was made by a pacifist. And also has just some of the most badass moments of the entire Godzilla franchise. My favourite being when Godzilla just obliterates the military, unlike any other Godzilla movie. They fire everything at him, and then he just powers up his beam and destroys everything they have in one go. And you don't just see the tanks blow up, you see people being set on fire, being blown away by the force of his beam. It's amazing. They get obliterated in one shot. Or the scene where Mothra is flying away from Godzilla's beam, and the military are just up in a tower, and Mothra just flies in the way, and oh no, they're in the way of Godzilla's beam and they get killed. It's sort of weird how comical some of those deaths are. Weird in a good way. This movie also has my favourite soundtrack in the entire Godzilla franchise. Just every single track in it is so good. It has this mystical, godlike feel to it. Like all these kaijus have their own theme, and it makes them sound like gods. I also love the human characters in this movie. I think this has the best collection of human characters next to Godzilla. They're actually written like real humans. They feel like real humans. Yes, the main female lead is a budding reporter who wants to get, you know, the big scoop to further her career. But that's not all she is. We see her try to go on a date, we see her get drunk, we see her with her dad and stuff like that. There's just such great interactions in this movie which make these characters feel like real people. I just can't sing praise of this movie enough. I love this movie. It is my favourite Godzilla movie ever made. I just adore it. It's my all-time favourite Godzilla movie ever made. It's my gold standard of Godzilla, and I cannot honestly see any way it can be beaten as my all-time favourite. I adore this movie. I adore this movie so much that I actually have it on DVD 3 times. Once was because I lost the original DVD between moving houses, and the second time was because I have the American version and the Japanese version. I just love this movie so much. Apart from Godzilla, this is the only Godzilla movie I have more than one copy of. I just adore it so much. It's my favourite Godzilla movie of all time. I will climb to the top of Mount Everest and shout and proclaim it to the world. This is the best Godzilla movie. This is my favourite Godzilla movie of all time. And with that, this list, the countdown, finally comes to an end.